September of 1862. Union forces were trying to come across this bridge, and there was a battalion of 450 to 500 Georgia sharpshooters on this side of the bridge that kept the Yankees from coming across that bridge for 2.5 to 3 hours. Those 450 Georgians held off 14,000 Union troops, held them up. They finally made it across the bridge over Antietam Creek.
During the Battle of Antietam, when Confederate and Union troops were fighting in farmlands northeast of the town of Sharpsburg, Maryland, a small group of Georgian soldiers were just to the south of the main battle action on the banks of Antietam Creek, guarding the approach to Sharpsburg across the Rohrbach Bridge, now known as Burnside Bridge, just one of 3 bridges crossing the creek. Rohrbach Bridge was 125 feet long and only wide enough to allow 4 men abreast to cross. This makes the Island Grove Bridge an excellent substitute for the Rohrbach Bridge for the purposes of this reenactment.
My name is Dale Julius, and I'm portraying a major from the 29th Massachusetts.
Talk to me about today's event, today's skirmish.
That was a good one. We had a lot of action and so on. It's working in a confined space like that with the bridge. I thought they handled that quite well, doing the bridge drill, we call it.
Talk about, you had cannons here.
Oh yeah. They overall, I mean, like it paints the picture, gives the people an idea of, how things might have looked like back then. Of course, it was pretty intense because they're firing real bullets as opposed to just making a noise. But it gives you that feeling of what it might have been like.
My name is First Lieutenant Greg Webster. I'm from Voluntown, Connecticut, and I am the commander of Corbin's Battery of the 15th Massachusetts Infantry Regiment.
Talk to me about what we got going on here today. It seems like you're in the middle of quite a battle.
Right, I have 2 12-pound mountain howitzers. Lieutenant Frank Corbin was the battery commander back in the Civil War, and he had 6 mountain howitzers and 25 cannoneers. And his battery existed early in the war in support of the 15th Mass Infantry Regiment.
The ones that can see the artillery pieces, we're going to go through what they have to do in order to fire them. There's certain steps that are involved. It's not just a question of opening the breech from the back, throwing a shell in, closing it, pulling the end. The first thing they're going to do is they're going to worm it. On one of their instruments, they have 2 implements with them. One is a worm, and the other one is a dry sponge and a wet sponge. There are 2 sticks with the worm on one end. The worm, all that is a big corkscrew. They put that down the barrel, take a couple of twists, pull it out. They do that so that any remnants of the powder bag is removed from that barrel. Because one thing you don't want to do is what? You don't want to mix fire with gunpowder. They're not compatible. So they worm it. Take what they can out. Next thing they're going to do is they're going to wet sponge it. On one end of the implement there is 2 types of sponges. Dry sponge and a wet sponge. Put it in a little bucket of water, give it a couple of twists to get the excess water out, ram it down the barrel, and that sews out any embers that the worm didn't get. Then they're going to dry sponge it, because you got a wet barrel. So they're going to put the dry sponge down. That takes care of whatever moisture, somewhat, not 100%, but some of the moisture out. The gun captain will call for a certain kind of round. These fire a solid ball, they fire a canister round, and an explosive round. Gun captain would call for solid shot at a range of X whatever. The box that some people can see and some people can't, that's the ammo chest. The number 6 man stands at that chest. Number 5 man comes after the order is taken for whatever powder, gets the round, puts it in a leather haversack, runs it over to the gun captain. Gun captain looks at it, makes sure it's the right round. It goes to the front of the gun. They put it in the barrel and they ram it down tight. It comes from the factory with powder and ball together, so you don't have to separate the two. After they put the round in, there has to be some way to set the charge off. You got this powder bag in there. How do you do it? There's a touch hole in the back of the bore. And the gunner has brass, for lack of better terms, brass ice pick. They call it a grip. They put that in the hole. They tap it with the back of their hand. That puts a hole into the powder bag. Then they put a fuse on top, a timer, and then they're ready to fire. Why do they use brass? Why don't they use something else? Steel. Steel on steel makes flames, or could make flames. Brass does not. It's a safety factor. You notice now, you see that rod on top of that wheel? That gun is ready to fire. A lot of people see an artillery piece, they immediately cover their ears. You don't have to. The gunners are going to tell you when that gun's going to fire. If it's on the hub, it's ready to fire. When they take it down and they lean away and cover their ear, that's when they're going to fire. They're going to pull the lanyard. These are 12-pound mountain howitzers. They fired on a solid ball. It was about 5 inches in diameter. At a range of about 1,000 yards. They might use canister round. Canister round is a big shotgun. It's like a can full of mini balls and nails or whatever else you might have. When they fire that, it comes out of the barrel and it opens up, spreads out. It'll wipe out 10 or 15 guys in a line.
Solid shot is a round ball of solid iron, commonly called a cannonball. For a 12-pounder cannon or howitzer, it measures 4.5 inches in diameter. All rounds for a 12-pounder would be 4.5 inches in diameter. Any bigger, and it would not fit into the barrel. Any smaller, and it would not fire properly. It sits in a wooden cup called a sabot, named after the wooden shoes most famously known to be worn by the Dutch. The ball is secured to the sabot by 2 crossed iron straps nailed to the wooden cup. The cartridge bag or powder bag was tied to the groove cut in the base of the sabot. Canister round was a metal can which could be filled with many different types of material, most commonly with smaller shot, much like a shotgun shell. The canister would also be attached to a sabot with the powder bag tied to the sabot, as previously mentioned. The type of canister shot that would be used by the howitzers at this reenactment would look like this and was specifically designed for use in a howitzer. An explosive round looked like a normal cannonball, but it was hollow and filled with small lead or steel balls, again like a shotgun shell. It also contained a charge that would burst the round, scattering pieces of the ball plus the material that was inside. It was meant to explode and scatter its shrapnel with devastating effect on the enemy troops. The most commonly used was a fused version. It had a fuse in the hole where the gunpowder was poured into the ball. This fuse was ignited by the explosion of the charge that fired the ball, and the fuse was timed so that it ignited the burst charge inside the ball so many seconds after the firing of the cannon.
Company in the early part of the war had 100 men in it. They were doubled up. Like you see these individuals here, they're doubled up. The person in front of me is 1 elbow length away. That's how they went into battle.
Now let's see the entire sequence of loading and firing a 12-pound howitzer. Listen to the steps for reloading the gun called out by the gun captain and the response by the gun crew.
Brush and bed. Bed brushed. Wipe bed. Stop bed. Bed stopped. Search and clear. Search and clear. Tube clear.
Wet sponge.
Tube clear.
Tube sponge.
Dry swab. Tube sponge.
Wet sponge. Tube sponge.
Dry sponge. Tube sponge. Dry sponge. Loading charge. Charge loaded.
Ramming charge.
Loading charge.
Charge ram.
Charge loaded.
Ramming charge.
Test open. Firing by section.
Charge ram.
Not sighting the piece. Ready!
Charge charge. Charge pierced.
Prime in charge. Charge prime.
Prime in charge.
This is ready.
He's ready.
Fire! Prepare to move the pieces to the rear.
You saw how that smoke went when the gun fired. The smoke dispersed. It was gone. At Gettysburg, prior to Pickett's charge, there was 350 Napoleon artillery pieces firing. But it was a hot, humid day. The smoke didn't disperse like this. It just hung down in the battlefield. The gunners couldn't see where they were hitting. Consequently, a lot of the rounds went into the reserve. Didn't do anything for what they were basically trying to get was the front line of defense. When Pickett's charge started off, 15,000 troops plus or minus, 20 minutes, 10,000 casualties plus or minus. That was Gettysburg. Now we're at Antietam. Antietam was a year or so before. The gun is loaded. For those you can see it. You get the rammer up on the house. If for some reason that gun misfired, it didn't fire when it was supposed to, they would take the rammers and they would cross them on top of the wheels. That would indicate a misfire, and you do not go anywhere near a misfire because it could fire at any time it felt like firing. They got a procedure that they go through that they follow. Now the infantry. The weapons that we're using, we will not use original weapons, simply for the monetary value. You got an original weapon, it could go anywhere between $10,000 and $60,000. They are fully functional weapons, however. You can take these out hunting. They fire a 58 caliber bullet. Made out of soft lead. It's about the size of your little finger. Made out of soft lead. Unlike today's rounds that have steel encasement on them, this will not go through a bone. It shatters the bone. And because of the primitive technology they had medical-wise, the only way they could do anything about a shattered bone was through amputation. You go down to the major parks down in south, Gettysburg, Fredericksburg, you go through the museums, you'll see one of these that almost looks like it's had a pair of dikes taken to it. A pair of cutters, almost in half. Unfortunately, it wasn't a pair of cutters that did it. It was the teeth of the individual that was having his whatever amputated. They didn't have any anesthesia at the time, or very little. So what they did was the term bite the bullet. That's where that came from. They would bite the bullet. Some of the pain was so intense that these were almost bit in half. So, okay. The weapons themselves. 9 steps to load these weapons. Unlike today where you put a round in or you put a clip in and boom, 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 you go. There's 9 individual steps. Good infantryman could fire 3 rounds a minute. First step that you have is to open the boxes. The big box you see on their right hip, that's their cartridge box. It's got 40 plus rounds in it, supposedly. Next thing they would do is they would handle cartridge. They would take the cartridge out and bring it up to their mouth. Infantry decides one thing to require for infantry. Had to have teeth. Because when you physically had to take the paper cartridge and tear it with your teeth. It came from the factory with the cartridge and the powder all together, so you would tear it. When these guys are all done, you might see them when they walk by, the whole side of their face is black. Powder that they digested. Not intentional. All right, then I tore it. I bring it over to top of the barrel, I dump it down. Then I draw the rammer. The rammer is a little metal rod that's underneath the barrel. You draw the rammer. Ram cartridge, that's the next step. You take the rammer, it's got a flattened end on one end and just straight on the other end. You put that in with a flat end down, you ram the cartridge all the way to the bottom. Return rammer. You have to put your rammer back in the little spot that it belongs in. If you don't do that, you can't work your weapon again because you can't load. The only time you'll see us draw rammers is at inspection of arms. We do not draw rammers on the field. Anybody sees anybody draw a rammer on the field, they can call an automatic ceasefire, regardless of whatever rank you are. If a dog could speak and he could see it, he could do it. Simply because putting the rammer in, forgetting it, you're down and running out here. When you're running around in 90-degree weather or whatever, sometimes you might forget the rammer is in there. People on the other side of the line are not going to be happy with a 3-foot projectile coming across the field. So we don't draw the rammers. After you put the rammer back in, you take a little brass cap formulated of mercury. That's what the little pouch in the front is. It's a cap box. You put that on your nipple of the weapon. The nipple is a piece of metal with a hole in it. Screws into the side of the breech. You put the nipple on that. You cock the hammer. You pull the trigger. Hammer hits that little cap, sends the flame down into the hole. It hits the powder and out goes your bullet. 9 steps. 3 rounds a minute.
The Georgians held the west bank of Antietam Creek, defending Rohrbach Bridge under General Toombs. They had the high ground overlooking the bridge. General Burnside was attacking from the east. The Ohio Brigade attempted to take the bridge but got lost and wound up too far upstream. The 11th Connecticut engaged the Georgians at the bridge but retreated, sustaining heavy losses.
But it was white.
looks like a flag of surrender. Company! Company!
The second wave was by the 2nd Division of the 1st Brigade under Nagel and the 2nd Maryland and the 6th New Hampshire, attacked by the road but were stopped by the Georgians before they even reached the bridge. The third wave, by the 51st New York Volunteers and the 51st Pennsylvania Infantry, led by General Ferraro, came from the field on the east side of the creek and used the walls of the bridge and adjacent fences as cover and eventually charged and took the bridge.
To clear this up around, please. Company, fall back! Lieutenant's down! Rally on me! Rally on the colors! Rally right in front of the colors, boys. Form the line right up here. Get some shots off. Get some shots off. Take it on the line. You can't fire from back there. Ready! Hey! We can start this. Colors, stand!
but it took several hours longer than expected. The delay caused by this skirmish allowed General Hill's troops to arrive from Harper's Ferry to reinforce General Lee's army. These added troops also helped the Confederates to successfully retreat from the field the next day.
In a span of less than 12 hours, 25,000 Americans died or were wounded. That's more men that were killed than the first 3 days of D-Day invasion in 1944. They estimated, first off, someplace around 600,000 Americans died during the Civil War. That figure has been upgraded now. They estimate it roughly at 750,000, which I think was someplace around 4% of the population. Now, if you took 4% of today's population, I don't know what numbers you got. I have no idea, but it'd be substantial. A lot of them are buried with the term unknown. They didn't have dog tags like we have now. If you had a sense that you weren't going to survive this particular battle, you would have somebody write your name down on a piece of paper and pin it to your uniform. You go out and you get killed. Well, that's okay, because I'm known. I got my name on my thing here. People know who I am. They can let my kinfolk know. I get buried. I got a wooden cross on my grave. I got my name on that cross. I'm still known. Uh-oh. It rained out. My name was put on with charcoal. My name is not on the cross anymore. I am an unknown. My folks don't know where I am. Many, many unknowns. Today's technology we have in the medical field, DNA and all that, is amazing. There was 300 sailors and Marines that died on the USS in World War II. They were buried as unknowns in the Punch Bowl National Cemetery in Hawaii. They have gone through a process of exhuming these bodies. And up to this point, there's 270 of those 300 that have been ID'd and returned to their families through DNA. We have an unknown for World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam. Wrong. We do not have one from Vietnam. We did. After he was interned, a couple of years later, they disinterred him and they ID'd him. Got sent home to his family. All right. Enough of the previous. We'll go back to this time frame. We have a drummer here. You can ever hear the drummer boy of Shiloh, Johnny Clamp? He tried to get into 2 regiments, and they refused him because of his age. He hooked up with a Michigan unit, I think it's Michigan, as a mascot. They took him under his wing. They gave him a uniform. They cut down the musket to his side. He was 9 years old. By the time he was 12, he was a sergeant. He wanted to go to West Point, but he didn't have the education to do that. So he went to his former commander-in-chief, who happened to be President Grant. Grant said, anybody that can be a sergeant at 12 can be an officer. He made him a lieutenant. He retired from the U.S. Army in 1916 with the rank of Lieutenant General. Not everybody that wore blue was from the north. Not everybody that wore gray was from the south. town I live in now, up by the New Hampshire line, we have a Confederate buried there. But he was from that town originally. He went down south before the war on business, met a woman, married her, took his wife's cars, met his brother at Antietam in one of the lulls. They would have lulls, they would have, trading parties, and the commanding officers on either side. They might have a hoedown. Who knows what they would have. But at any rate, there was a lull. And he met his brother. His brother's still at Antietam. He survived and came home. Captain with a South Carolina unit. I'm sure that the state of Maine, if you punch in Confederate officers from the state of Maine, I did that, I got 32 hits. There's 3 general officers from Maine that served the Confederacy. Age, no different. Medal of Honor was first issued during the Civil War. It was generally issued for capture of colors. Color card was made up of 9 individuals. Their primary purpose was to protect those colors. When the battle line formed up, and the command of forward is given, before the command marched, the color company marched out 6 paces ahead of everybody else. 6 paces is what, roughly 18 feet maybe? So they're 18 feet out from everybody else. They knew that they had a 10 to 15% chance of surviving that particular battle because the colors identified your company. If you lost the colors, you wouldn't know where your company was and you'd be disorientated. It's like they try to kill the officers because the officers, the enlisted, have no idea what's going on. It's like cutting the head off a chicken. So a lot of Medal of Honor recipients, they're recipients, they're not winners. You don't go out to win the Medal of Honor. Most of them were given posthumously, which means they were given to the next of kin because they did not survive. There was one individual for the cavalry unit. They went against a Confederate stronghold and were repulsed. So they retreated. On their way back, the company colors took a hit and fell to the ground. He got halfway back to his camp, or his line, said that ain't right. He turned around, went back to get the colors. In the process, he took a bullet in the shoulder. Well, how do you ride a horse and pick things up? He put the reins in his mouth, went to the colors, reached down, picked them up, went back to the line. You get the Medal of Honor for that. He was 12 years old. Unfortunately, I hate to say it, but I don't think you'd find a 12-year-old in today's society that had the fortitude, the guts, the bravery, or loyalty to his company to do that. Now you see some guys with blue stripes. Well, and I know there's one with yellow stripes. Yellow stripe, each branch of service had their own color. You notice the yellow stripe here, he's not a soldier. He's a trooper, because he's cavalry. Cavalry had different names for their people. The ones with blue markings, which we don't have other than all the privates. The privates didn't have any rank. But a private and his cavalry would have, like, the individual's hat. It's got a yellow band on it. It would indicate. Infantry would be the blue rank. Artillery, when they come back around, you'll be able to see them, or when they leave the town. Oh no, they've already left the town. Artillery is red. They have red ranks. Medical would be black or green.
On the skirmish, pull back!
Present! Attention company! Shoulder up! Present up! Fire! Climb and shoulder, climb and shoulder. Battalion ready! Aim! Fire! Shoulder up! Without doubling! Left! Face! Forward! Thank you. March!
But when that was hanging down, it looked like a flag of surrender. So they came out with a third national, which was the same as the second national, except there was a 10-foot band of red on the trailing edge of the flag. So that when it hung limp, you would not take it, confuse it for a flag of surrender. Those are the only three flags that the government, the Confederacy had. That flag is not one of them. That's the soldier's flag. That identified their company. The stars represent the individual states, 13 states. Now, if you saw the guys in blue, every one of them is identical. Look at the guys in gray. There's not one dressed the same. Homespun material. Butternut was dyed. You might have somebody with blue pants. You got somebody with blue pants there. That might have come off a Yankee. He didn't need them anymore. Well, those shoes look like that the right size for me. Oh yeah, I'm taking those.
Along with the reenactment, there was also a model of a Union camp with tents set up so visitors could see how the soldiers and many of the extra military support groups, such as the U.S. Sanitary Commission, lived as they moved from battle site to battle site. The Sanitary Commission worked to support sick and wounded Union soldiers, as well as to help keep the healthy soldiers healthy.
You okay? Yes. Yeah. So we could also use an electric galvanic battery to wake him. But it's really just a lot easier to rock him back and forth about 15 times.
You know, there's all you had encampment here. I believe that right now, as we speak, right after the skirmish, there's actually an ongoing show of doing tourniquets.
Yes. Well, I heard it was going to be an amputation.
Amputation, but I mean, let's talk about that. You're doing an amputation. How important is it to show what happened during that time of those individuals who fought this war, and technology wasn't there to help them?
No, it was not there, and it gives people an inner, a really famous part of the Civil War was the amount of people that lost limbs, just because they're on the field, infection was roaring, and if it didn't kill you, it would probably take a limb, you know, a leg, 2 legs. It really was, the advancement in medicines that they made by the end of the war was incredible. So we start from the beginning. I mean, they'd cut off one leg and they'd wipe the blade off with a dirty towel and they'd cut off the next leg. So you can imagine the infections were just raging through the hospitals.
What do you think you're doing to my captain?
The tent that attracted the most visitors was the field hospital, where the surgeon performed a mock amputation.
I don't care! You better save him! You better save him! No, we're talking beyond the plank next!
At least he wasn't yelling about my uterus. Usually that's the problem. So, yes. All right. No, we never. All right, there we go. I need the key. I'm not good at my job. I am. So, ignoring that fact, we're going to get ahead and amputate. The first step is actually anesthetize this patient. There's 2 things we can use to do that. Ether. Ether, we don't tend to use. It's hard to transport, and it's really flammable, which when we're operating at night is a bad plan. So, we're going to use chloroform. We can't put him maybe all the way to sleep, like you might think about somebody going for surgery, because at that point, he can't breathe for himself. So, there's a very fine line where we drop chloroform slowly onto the sponge, have him breathe it in, and see his reaction. We check his heart. We see how his rhythm is going, his breathing. Because if he stops breathing, I've lost my patient. I probably shouldn't be a surgeon. So, is he out?
He's out. He's ready, Doc.
Check.
He's ready, Doc. Then take a look. Get better. His hand doesn't turn. Right, Doc.
All right, so first step is actually going to be to put a tourniquet to stop the bleeding. Just don't tourniquet the neck. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to lift the arm. So you're going to hold the arm up above the heart. You're going to massage the blood back, because we want as little blood in this arm as is possible. At which point you apply the tourniquet. And you cinch it down. He may make some noise during this process. That's normal. It's his nervous system. It doesn't mean he's awake. It doesn't even mean he's feeling pain. It's just, like I said, we can't put him all the way to sleep, or he wouldn't wake up again. All right, so at this point, we have to remove the soft flesh. We're going to use something called a Catlin knife. It's large, that's on purpose. You want to be able to do this in 2 incisions. You go from the inside to the outside, and then back again. Just ignore that. Alright.
Just breathe.
At this point,
Just breathe.
you've got the skin. It should work like a shirt sleeve. A little bit of tension, but if you run your fingers under it, you'll be able to pull it back. At which point, you've exposed the soft tissue. We actually want to keep more of this than you'd think we would. Typically, if you've seen a bad surgeon, and I'm sure most of you have, they're going to saw straight through it, and they're going to try and do it as quickly as possible. There was this one guy who decided to race someone else. Could I do the surgery in under a minute? He did. At this point, you've removed most of the soft tissue. You can see things like tendons and ligaments, and you can visualize the bone. Although it's right in the middle of it. So you can visualize the bone. It's important that when we're working with tendons, that we actually secure them. They're very elastic. If you cut them, and they aren't attached to anything, they will shoot back up into the limb. And actually, that person will lose a lot of functionality because they no longer have some of the connective tissue that they need to move that arm, even if it is a stump. All right, so next, forceps scalpel. We're going to secure the tendon. All right, and then we cut because we don't want that disappearing. All right, there we are. So now I know that's not going to shoot back up in his arm. Now, how do we make sure there's enough meat here that he has a soft limb when he's, well, stump after he's done? Because the last thing you want is pointy bone on the end of the stump, because that person's going to be applying weight to it for the rest of their life. So you want to leave at least an inch of muscle so that you can pad it later. What we do is we'll take leather or a cloth and we'll manipulate it through to pull back on that. And now you can see I've secured that soft tissue back. I've got something to work with, and now I just have bone in the way. Anyone's guesses as to what we do next? Bone saw. There are 2 options. Some use this. This is actually for those of you who have some future sort of knowledge. It's something that exists today, your day. No changes, just the materials. This is what I'm using. Quite similar. So, we're going to go ahead, we're going to take bone nippers and bone file. Because like I said, we don't want sharp bits here. So what you'll do is you'll nip the edges of this bone. Anything that looks shattered or broken, this looks pretty clean. And then you'll file the edge of it and make it as smooth as you possibly can. Now, you can only get so far with that. Now the other piece that we need to keep in mind is nerves. There's this rumor that if you cut a nerve that's too major, it'll stop someone's heart. That's not true. If you, however, cut the nerve too short, the person will experience what we call neuralgia, or phantom limb. It is far more likely, if we cut this nerve too short, that that's going to be a problem. So, we're going to make sure to cut the nerve at the same level as the bone. And then he's much less likely to get phantom limb, although it is still possible. So, at this point, we're nearly done. We're going to take what's called a tenaculum. It's got sutures preloaded on it, already tied in the little knots right here, right? So we're going to grasp the vessels that are still bleeding. We're going to slip the knotted suture over them and tighten it, and we will do that as many times as necessary. Ligature is often the name for this. And so you would go in, you would hook it, you'd slide it over, knot it, and then pull it back out again. You would do that as many times as necessary because it's far more important to have too many knots than too few. All right. At this point, we've got a decent amount of meat. We've resolved the connective tissue in the vessels, and you'll notice we have a large amount of skin left. That is on purpose. There are 3 ways we can deal with this. We can do a single flap, we can do a double flap, or some people get kind of fancy and they do this triple flap completely once it starts resolving. It'll get tighter and firmer and become more and more a useful limb. And we always keep it under pressure. So you would just do just a couple of sutures to keep it where it needs to be.
Take the flies off.
Well, that's your turn. All right. So, at this point, we've got a patient with a limb, stump, and he's still asleep. But we can't keep him under forever, so the next step is actually to rock him. There's a few maneuvers we can do. We could lift his arms back up and down.
I'm Peter Preble. I'm a chaplain with the New England Brigade.
Talk to me about today's skirmish.
So it's not what we normally have. We're down a few people, but it's we were reenacting a battle scenario, not any particular battle, but just a battle scenario. And we'll do it again tomorrow, the next day. You know, it's kind of the same thing.
Yeah, we're coming out of COVID. What is it like to be able to do reenactments like this once again?
This is great. It's been at least 24 months since we've done this, and several of the boys were on the bridge remarking how nice it is to be here again, to hear the shots going off, to be able to fire again and be in wool, and it's just great to be back.
And how about history? I mean, sharing history and a historic battle like the Civil War.
It's, I think that's what we do. We consider ourselves living historians, so none of us do first person, but, the camp's open now, spectators will come through, we'll talk to them about the various roles and what we did, and most of the guys and the ladies are pretty up on the history, so they can answer pretty much any question that people would have.
Well, what about for the youngsters who come and see this? Have you had any youngsters come up to you today and ask you what's going on, who are you, and what's it like? What's the joy for you to kind of explain what you're doing here?
Well, I think that's our target audience, to get the next generation and the generations after involved in a living history, to get them involved in a love of history so they understand sort of the history of America.
Talk to me about community and being involved in an event here in the community of Abington.
So this is a great venue. This is my first time here, but we couldn't ask for better ground. It's a fabulous place. The town is very hospitable. It's just great to be here.
And where are you traveling here from?
I'm just from Weymouth, so I'm not too far away. I'm pretty close.
But you've actually had some folks who actually have come from miles away.
All over New England. We have folks from Vermont. I think there's a couple of folks here from New York. So they come from pretty much everywhere to come to events like this. This is our first event of the year, so there's people that have been itching to get out.
Anything you want to say in closing that I didn't ask you, but you want to at least talk about being a part of today's activities?
I think it's just a great way to experience history from a living perspective, where you can see in a much smaller scale what a battle scenario would have been like.
Talk to me about having the opportunity to educate the community about history.
Yeah, it's something that's just bringing it out of the books, and what we can hope for is that people will see this and then they'll go home and they'll say, I'm going to look at that book, or I'm going to watch that movie, or I'm going to try to understand a little bit more, because the Civil War, was the defining moment of our country, and even though it was 160 years ago, the ramifications are still with us, the repercussions, and we still learn new stuff all the time. So we try to get the young people involved and say, let's take a look at your history book. And
How does one person go about joining the company?
Well, all you have to do is ask a member of the company what it is required to join, and we'll talk your ear off for hours. Basically, we want people that have some knowledge and love of history, that aren't afraid to camp, that really are into what they're doing and are willing to research what they're doing and can do it.
Yeah. All right, so basically you go up, you ask a member, and then that's how you get involved?
Yeah.
How long have you been in the company?
I've been with them about 12 years. I actually resisted, but I had a friend that traced his family tree, and he actually got me to try one weekend, and I got hooked.
Awesome. Where are some of the places you've gone?
I have been to Manassas for the first Battle of Bull Run. I've been down to Gettysburg for the Gettysburg 150th. There's been a lot of local reenactments, like 22nd has always done the reenactment at Island Grove. We've been in Templeton, Mass, Winchendon, Collins Foundation up in Stowe, Fort Adams down in Newport, Rhode Island, Fort Tabor, and New Bedford when they had them.
So you were well traveled.
Yeah.
You're all over the place. All right.
Talk to me about the importance of being here for Founders Day in the town of Abington.
Well, this is incredible. We've been looking forward to this event. In fact, all last year we really didn't have any events, so we're very excited to be out here to participate and to portray a historic battery and to remember those who came before us.
I understand that you have people here from all over the region. Is that accurate?
Right. I have cannoneers from Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts. And I have 10 cannoneers today and 2 artillery pieces.
Talk to me about the importance of holding historical type reenactments like this.
Well, it's very important to remember those who fought to keep our country united. And not to forget all those who sacrificed their lives and were killed and maimed, to make this country what it is today, to bring it back together.
This almost didn't happen because of COVID. How do you feel? What's your thoughts on that? We're able to hold this event in light of a pandemic?
Well, I'm very glad that this country and the world as a whole is getting beyond COVID. We've all been in isolation for a good year now, so we're very excited to get back out here and to return life to normal and to do what we enjoy to do, and like I say, remember those who came before us.
This is probably one of your first events, probably in a year and a half?
Yeah, that's why I think we had a good turnout here today, because normally this is more of a localized thing, but we got people from all around that showed up, and it was good to see everybody. It's like a family reunion almost.
This is our first weekend in over a year that we've been out. Unfortunately, we don't have too many people here today because there's another event going on down in Pennsylvania where some of us went to. But because of what happened in the past year, all events have been closed. So we're starting to get going again. I think we got 4 events scheduled for this year. Hopefully we'll have a lot more manpower and whatnot.
If you would, anything in closing in regards to today's activities and being a part of Founders Day?
Yes, I always enjoy coming over here. I've been coming to this place since I was in the Boy Scouts back in the early 60s, and I always remember the arch, and it's a beautiful piece of land, and glad to see the town preserves it and makes good use of it.
When Johnny comes marching home again, hurrah, hurrah, we'll give him a hearty welcome, them hurrah, hurrah. The boys will cheer and the men will shout and the ladies, they will all turn out and we'll all feel gay when Johnny comes marching home. The old church bell will peal with joy, hurrah, hurrah. Welcome home, our darling boy, hurrah, hurrah. The village of lads and lassies say with roses